Hello, everyone. I'm Pinar Guanj, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of chatting with Tess Posner. Tess is an award-winning social entrepreneur and music artist building a more human-centered future for AI. Through her initiative Resonance, she creates spaces for dialogue and collective sense-making that help communities reclaim agency in an AI-driven world. Tess served as founding CEO of AI4ALL, growing it to over 20 partner sites and international recognition, and currently serves as a board member and strategic advisor. Previously, she led TechHire at Opportunity at Work, launched out of the White House, and founded Sama School, an education initiative she scaled across the US and internationally. Tess is also a music artist focused on healing and empowerment. In 2024, she co-founded Venus, a showcase highlighting women and gender non-conforming individuals in music, featuring Grammy and Emmy award-winning artists. Enjoy. Tess, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I lots of excitement about this conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I've spent the last almost decade around working on responsible and inclusive artificial intelligence. I led an organization called AI for All that is focused on empowering and educating the next generation of AI technologists through responsible and inclusive AI education. And we try to get voices and people that aren't typically represented in AI to be part of shaping what this technology looks like. So that's been a really amazing journey. And I've also been in the music industry and business as an artist and a producer, creating music to really explore some of the same themes around empowerment and healing and creating a better world, which I think art is an incredible way to do that. So yeah, just excited for the conversation today.
I love that. And I'm also not surprised your kind of creative artist lens infused into the AI world shows up as how can we be more inclusive and responsible, and what might that look like? And you mentioned obviously starting with education. I would love to hear kind of, I guess, first of all, before going into approach, why starting at education, and why you felt the need of like focusing on how do we train future technologists?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we think about something like AI, and I actually started in AI around 2017, early 2017. So this was well before the generative AI explosion that we've seen over the last few years. And it was very much this kind of sense from a lot of the amazing technologists that I was partnering with at the time that were actually building these frontier models and thinking about the future, that this technology was going to be so transformative in ways that we couldn't even quite imagine. And I think that's definitely come true. Like I remember I had this slide in some of my pitch decks where it was like, AI will be everywhere. And I really had to convince people that it was like
Wow,
going to be a big deal.
that was not even 10 years ago. Isn't that insane?
It's so insane. Yeah. And it's like, I don't think any of us really predicted exactly how it would unfold, but we knew that because it is trying to create intelligence and trying to mirror human intelligence, that there's all these potential risks. So, for example, the more that we outsource decision making to AI, it affects people's lives in really profound ways. And we're already seeing that today. So, with education, to answer your question, I think that we were really focused on who is creating the technology, who gets to be part of shaping this transformational technology that will affect everyone. It's not just going to affect some people. And yet, there's a very small, select set of people that are currently developing and kind of making these decisions on behalf of all of us. So, our vision was okay, if we can get people from a more broad representation of society to be not just consumers of AI, but builders and creators and leaders, that will ensure that the technology better reflects the needs of everyone. And so that's why starting with education, we worked with high school students Today we still work with college students, and we're really thinking about when do people make these decisions about where they go in their lives. And the young people are going to be the ones most impacted by the decisions we make today. And so equipping them with the knowledge and the skills and to be empowered is so incredibly critical. And a lot of people, even though AI is going to be one of the biggest things to shape the next generation, you'd be shocked at how much it's not included in schools. In fact, they're banning it still in a lot of schools. So that's why I think starting with education is so, so important. And even not just for young people, but also for adults and really every age.
I love this for so many reasons, and it's hitting so many nerves all at once. I'm a design educator. I'm at Parsons and at SVA, and I predominantly teach inclusive design, co-design, participatory research methods. And I think because of Sour, obviously, and we're a mission-driven studio, we get pulled into various topics around that touches upon social or urban problems. And with AI, obviously, we started to get pulled into many different projects around that. And so working in that space, starting to see these gaps have been so frustrating in the sense that, when you go into the AI world today or AI implementation, to your point, what we talk about as in participatory research and design in kind of this academic environment and in graduate schools, we don't necessarily see that in the technology development process, right, or AI lifecycle. And I don't even see any much design thinking kind of being infused into the process. And then when I go to the school environment, I see this massive gap of how designers and creatives can meaningfully show up in the process to really help, facilitate a process that is more inclusive, that is multi-stakeholder engaged, right? And it's not part of the curriculum, to your point, sometimes it's banned. Also, I love, you mentioned high school and undergrad students, because I teach graduate students, and I find sometimes even the mindsets and wiring around even how to approach design is very settled, right? So there's this unlearning and unwiring that needs to happen almost, because even in some design education backgrounds, we don't talk about co-creation a lot, and there's also that side of the story. And what I also feel, both being in kind of like a design school and seeing kind of the corporate environment or professional environment, these silos that probably start getting reinforced in school, where different professions, even though we say we're collaborating, we're not really collaborating, nor that we understand each other. And I remember this is something that I keep, sometimes students bring up, saying, even if we know how to go about, design more responsibly or ethically or inclusively, how do we convince other stakeholders? And I think designers are often told, you need to speak the business language. And then I think this past few years, especially seeing what's happening with AI and a much more, also bringing all our problems to service in a much more accelerated view, you're kind of we can't just tell designers to talk the business language. We need to be also in business schools talking about these methods and why it matters. We need to be in engineering programs. And my background was actually in engineering, and my life carried me into design research and strategy. And that, and when you start kind of looking into, wait a second, we don't, we have these silos, these carry on, and then we get comfortable working in silos, and then we start creating things in our bubble, which in the AI world is much more dangerous. This sounds like a very old problem we have, and we're putting AI on top of it, and now it's exploding in many different ways. So hence my true appreciation around starting with high school and undergrad students, which I feel, especially high school, before you even go into any identification of profession, how you think about work, if we can start shaping those, that sounds very meaningful. With that, and everything that I just told you, do you see that the difference in like if you get pushback, maybe corporate capacity building or like higher education, how is it in high school realm? Like how does this differ? Like, do you feel the difference as you go into these spaces?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, what we found from the high school level is that, as you're saying, a lot of the identity is being shaped at those early levels. So, for example, we tried to focus on young women and students of color and young people that wouldn't otherwise maybe get as much exposure to emerging technologies. And part of that, there's a couple of like root causes for that that we looked at and designed our program around. One is the sense of like, your sense of confidence in the space. Like if you don't have role models and mentors who you might identify with, you might have imposter syndrome or think, oh, I can't really do this. I don't really know the pathway to do it, or maybe I don't think I'm capable of doing it. And so that shapes a lot of like your early identity about, well, should I pursue something like AI and computer science, especially at like the deep technical kind of PhD, deep research levels? And so that's already something that's a barrier, even in high school. But because we're starting so young, we can help students really come to a sense of self belief because we have this community that we're building amongst peers and we have them connected to role models and mentors that are supportive and saying, like, you can do this. And so I think it's a really powerful time to kind of break through some of those limiting beliefs that they might have and be able to show them a sense of what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there's a lot more openness in younger ages to the opportunities with technology
Mm,
because adults, for better or for worse, are jaded by past experience. Like with social media, like kind of feel that, even with the rulings this past few weeks, it's like
yeah.
this whole thing failed us. Like it didn't go the way we all thought. 2009, 2010, we were all like, oh, connect the world with social media, this big promise. And because of all the dynamics and the market incentives and the way that these platforms are designed, it ended up having these, potentially unintended, maybe intended consequences that are harmful. And we're seeing the impacts. And the same thing can be said of AI, right? In terms of what might happen. But we also have to be open to the possibilities and the sense that we can shape it in a different way. And I think there's like a jaded, sort of hopeless attitude that comes across a lot with adults because they've been there, done that, and they don't quite believe that something else is possible. And that's a dynamic that's gone on, since the beginning of time. Like young people are optimistic and think things can change, and
Yeah.
older generations are more jaded. So I feel like that's why the youth voice is so critical because they're seeing things and opportunities that we might not. And
Yeah.
having their voice and creativity in the mix is so important.
Yeah. Or like the other side of the spectrum, if the adults are almost like delusionally optimistic about AI too, they can be the critical lens in how it might show up, right? Because I feel like especially with AI, the polars are, I mean, we're getting more and more polarized about everything anyway, and going back to tying back to social media and how that plays a role in that, maybe that's a different podcast. But with AI too, like it's so evident, right? Like I'm even, in like projects or work, like I could see kind of these stakeholders who are like, yeah, like let's replace everything with AI. And this group is like, oh my God, like there's no way it can replace us. But like, well, actually, how does it show up in the process? Maybe it's the process, right? Maybe it's not like a black or white thing. And to your point, I think that approaching technology in a more creative mindset already brings you from the polars. Like, you can go different ways, and how do you kind of navigate that? And it's so empowering, what you said around this like identity building phase, that also we could infuse, good ethics and values. We recently did this project as a co-design partner, and I think it was funded by Ford Foundation for Public Interest Technology University Network, and it's stakeholders from many different universities coming together from departments of social work, law, engineering, understanding how do we educate technologists for the public interest, right? And in that process, we held this like co-creation panel with students, only students, and we already have faculty in the process. We brought in industry experts, did another co-creation with them, but in one session it was only students, and I think out of a 10-student panel, only one said they took an ethics class, and it was an elective, and she was interested in it. It wasn't even, and that also says volumes, because I think, especially being an inclusive design space, you're seeing, as you get into the space, you're seeing, when we exclude people, most of the times, I'm not saying always, but most of the times, it's not like this devious plan to like exclude people. It's very much lack of exposure, understanding, not even thinking of including. And you can see, like, when you're hearing kind of student perspectives, how that could be led by education itself, because I teach ethical design leadership at Parsons, and one thing I love to do with the students in class is to hold debates through different ethical perspectives, which grounds us in the framework, and we don't get triggered or emotional because we're holding a certain point of view. And now seeing, like, as a society, we're losing the art of debate and we can't even hold a conversation, I think it's very interesting. So I'm a huge advocate for, engaging with the younger audience as soon as possible, which is why I love AI4ALL's approach. How did you find faculty's or a teacher's, educator's approach? You shared the student lens. How is, because I've seen both, right? Like, people are very open to integrate new things, very, conservative in some ways, which, I think in this day and age, having conservative point of views could be useful sometimes. But where did you see kind of overall where educators stand when it comes to it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in our early work at AI for All, we worked with AI research lab faculty, and they were our key partners in delivering the programs. And they were amazing to work with. Many of them were just doing this like really interesting research in lots of different areas. In their labs, we worked with like 20 universities in a lot of different top AI labs, and they were just really excited to, bring more voices, more people into their labs to expose them to what's going on. There's research that shows that exposure to emerging technologies leads to greater levels of innovation. If you look at like patents, patent creation. And so early exposure to innovation creates greater levels of innovation later. So I think that was part of the idea too, is let's show them where it's happening. And it's like the raw, messy process. Like, we're trying to do, AI for healthcare and detect Alzheimer's earlier on. And you see the potential for this to do good in the world. And I think that's what a lot of our students were really drawn to. So the educators were completely on the same page. Like, we need to get more people studying this, because the more people that can study this from all different backgrounds, the wider set of problems we're going to be able to address with something like AI. So amongst our partners, there was a lot of amazing leaders that we worked with that were part of the mission. I think now, in terms of faculty, so AI for All, last year, we launched a faculty council on inclusive AI education. So yeah, that effort is funded by Google, and it's really about creating standards for how to be inclusive and like forward thinking. So the faculty that joined that, again, same thing. They're like very on the same page of the mission, and I think are showing so much leadership. I do think that also what I've seen is that the schools themselves are struggling with how to think about AI. And a lot of them are still banning it, and saying, well,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to use it in the classrooms or for your assignments or whatever. There, there are definitely exceptions. So there are some universities that are embracing it, but overall, it's just a mess. And I think, at the same time, we're seeing like employers and companies now are requiring, like here in Silicon Valley, people are saying, it's not even just about how many lines of code, it's about how many tokens you use. So, in other words, you're getting judged on how you're maximizing your AI use.
Wow.
And if you're not like it's called token maxing, like you need to be using as much AI capacity as possible because that's going to amplify your productivity. So that's the standard. And yet at the same time, students aren't allowed to use AI. So it doesn't make sense at all. And I think at the same time, I understand because it's like we don't know what's happening and it's hard. Like change is hard. Big institutions have a
Yeah.
really hard time with it. What are we going to do? How are they going to transform? And what is that? What does education even mean when you have something like AI? I went to St. John's College for undergrad. So you mentioned debate, and St. John's College is all discussion based, oral exams, and primary texts only. We study ancient Greek and we read Plato and ancient Greek, and we do everything science, math, language, philosophy, literature, all discussions of
Wow.
20 people, no lectures. And I think back to that and I'm like, oh, that was very forward thinking because
That's the
even though it's
future
like
of
an
education.
ancient, exactly. Like you really couldn't, AI couldn't have really helped very much except for maybe like helping with the readings, like your homework or whatever. But
Right.
a lot of it was just how you show up in person and you're doing math proofs at the board. Like you can't fake that. If you don't understand it, you're going to be embarrassed in front of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's so good because, obviously design schools, I feel like we're more flexible in, how you use, just let us know if you use it. And I'm always, and especially because I teach graduate students, I'm more, use it, be critical in how you're using it and tell us why you used it and how you used it and how it, augmented your process too, so like you're
That's good to
thinking
hear.
about these things. But even then, sometimes I get these like, progress assignments, which in a design school, we're not necessarily like strictly grading anyway. So I'm like, also, if you're sending me like, which I can tell in like 5 seconds if it's like a LLM summary of your progress.
Yep.
Why am I reading that? Like, am I grading AI? And why are you doing it? How is this adding to you, especially that you're in a graduate program? And I remember at one point I did have a conversation about it saying, if you are replacing yourself with AI now, why shouldn't you be replaced in the workforce? Like what is like if you can't define how you're going to use this in a way that also helps like business processes, humanity, and you just use it for the sake of like assignment, to replacement, then you will be replaced. If we're already, I don't want to grade AI. This is not fun for me. But I find, students are even trying to find the balance, as it is very addictive and it does create these, and there are some, like in some deeper conversations I have with students, self-doubt. Especially, if you're an international student, did I write this well? Maybe I like reshape it with AI and then what you were really meaning in that actually got erased in that, like, um, or the use for like both homework and all these like life admin things leading into a lot of personal conversations, and them also having like therapy relationships with large language models. And I find it's to your point, change is very hard, and in this transition era, there's a lot of trial and error, and I guess the fear is like, can that come in the expense of youth? Because also in the workforce too, what does a junior role mean anymore, right? Like, how do we really, because there's so much we learn from the process that you can't really put it into like a textbook. If you haven't generated that insights because you're replacing the process, what is, how do you gain experience, or how do you become more senior in a topic? And I think there's all these questions we don't know the answers to yet. However, going back to prototypes and thinking things, there's various like more early stage projects we're working on, or things that we're exploring, that some are around, you mentioned already, mentorships, right? Like, can AI actually show up to make meaningful connections and into the world, and have students early on forge these industry partners or mentors because of the gap in education and real practice that we're seeing today? Or should we be going into more apprentices where, kind of redefining education from like use these technology versus start making these technologies early on? And if we can create apprenticeships too, does that compensate for the early stage career that you're having a hard time getting now? So there's these like that, there are different models, and I would love to get your take on, any forward thinking, in addition to St. John's. I don't know for how long they've been doing that model, a very forward thinking education system. Any other approaches you're seeing or thinking or advising, organizations to take on?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think St. John's is, more of an ancient model. Like it's going back to
But
Socratic
it's like the
dialogue and
organic, like how we went back to organic. I think like St. John's had the organic education system, and we should bring it back.
I know. Yeah. Well, I definitely think there's literally an urgency to create new model. I mean, I've been talking about this for 15 years, and I was part of like a fellowship at Institute for the Future back in 2015, and we were talking about that then. And there's definitely really cool models like apprenticeships that we can look at. There's just ideas of how to like redesign the whole system, because
Mm,
like you said, the early rungs of the career ladder are what is already being replaced by AI quickly and rapidly. And there is some early data that's showing that came out of Stanford recently, and I think we'll continue to see, because that's the stuff that you can more
right.
easily automate, and where the AI models are at in terms of their capacity. And just in terms of how the greater economy will be shifted, because not only is AI going to replace certain roles, but there's also this sense of like augmentation, the agentic systems that are already being incorporated into companies, that it's going to shift roles. And so you have to be prepared to do things differently. And there's just really not a preparation for what that's going to look like. So I think from my end, when I think about where things are going, I think a lot of the core skills that are critical are going to be things like, metacognition. So being able to think about how you think and examine that, because artificial intelligence is a cognitive power. So being able to think about how you think is helps you actually design how to work with AI and get the most out of it. Same thing with critical thinking. There's a lot of like process design that you need to do with AI to, like, I work a lot with Claude Code and creating these different workflows and skills, and how you actually structure it is part of how you sort of like augment and amplify your own capabilities with AI. And if you don't have the ability to do that, you're just not going to get the most out of it, which is going to put you at a disadvantage in the economy. So there's metacognition, there's critical thinking, there's creativity, flexibility, and fluidity, because we know that this is changing quickly. So how do you actually, like, I've built a AI daily news brief because I'm working in the AI space. So for me, having that access to exactly what's going on ongoing is
Mm,
so important. But if I were a job seeker, I would build a job app where it's like every day it's researching the jobs that I'm looking for, and
right.
then kind of researching where my advantages could be. So there's ways to use AI to actually adapt and adjust and leverage what's going on. But those are all skills that we're not teaching. And so I think
Yeah.
redesigning education around the things, what I call them future proof skills, because no matter what happens, we know that empathy, communication, creativity, metacognition, critical thinking will be important. We don't need to define exactly what the jobs are going to be. Those
Right.
skills will be transferable in the transformation that's coming.
Uh, I love that and the examples you gave, breaking it down as, it very much has the person defining the use case in a very clear objective because of, what you're working on, and the agent or AI, like it's coming in to kind of support that. Without replacing the process of it either, right? So it's like, where in the process does it show up? Where does it replace my work? Where does it complement my work? Where do I need to like do a redesign so I do this faster, but by myself, right? So it's like we said, like the process design of it, I love because even, and I don't even know how to describe it other than like it's just like jerk reaction that I have when I see kind of agents going into full replacement of the process, even if the process seems insignificant. Let me give an example. Like, I think there was somebody was like showing, oh, how like my agent is doing my Tesco shopping and I'm not doing any shopping anymore. And I would be okay with that if this was coming from, a senior who doesn't necessarily, need to go out, or it's difficult for them to go out, or, there's accessibility issue, whatever it is, right? If it had like a very valid use case. But this was like a 16-year-old who hasn't probably done a lot of shopping anyway in their lives. And when they had to, they replaced it already. And I don't think we even, and I don't think if we'll ever come to a point where we can quantify the value of these seemingly mundane looking everyday things where we gain so many life skills, right? Like I think a psychologist had given this example around like in, as a millennial, for me when I was younger, like there's like Blockbuster, right? Like you want a DVD, you go through the aisles, you look for it, you may or may not find it, and if you can't find it, you're going to deal with the disappointment, it's okay. Maybe there is next time, right? We don't have this like on-demand viewing, and that's what we grew up with. And I don't think we can kind of generalize that into saying that's why we became resilient because we had Blockbuster. But I don't know if that accumulates because nothing was served immediately. So we had like a generation that was served, right? Which I think we're seeing more. There was mental health consequences of that, readily available everything all at once. And now we're talking about not even being served, but being replaced in the things that we're going to do. And we don't even understand the implications of that, I think, to us psychologically, cognitively, right? And the examples you gave are like beautiful examples on how it shows up in the process that you're doing for yourself that is meaningful. I'm curious to hear your thoughts around now with especially more of the push, in agentic workflows or even lives, apparently, where we're seeing a lot of process or push for process replacement. And recently I was reading this article around now even like, for security purposes, there used to be a lot of conversation around human in the loop. Now I started to read, oh, human in the loop can't scale, slowing us down, right? So not even within a year, you started to hear that as well now. So there's more even the push for agents to run autonomously and running the process. So would love to get your thoughts on that. And, beyond, I guess, the education model where we can approach youth to really think about things in a more critical lens. With the push that is happening today and how you think the societal implications of that might be. I know it's a massive question, but just curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, one other framing that I've heard for what you're talking about is that there's two levels of automation. There's the actual work process itself and the sort of execution of it. And then there's the verification layer. So like you said, we're verifying the work. And certainly with myself, like I know I verify everything. Like I don't,
Yeah.
there's nothing that AI does that I don't look at very closely. And I think for most people that's true. But AI is going to get better and better at the verification
Yeah.
level, and that's what you're saying, because it doesn't scale to, like, people are going to push towards now all the coding software tests will be done by AI. And so you have these systems where like there's 8 AI coding agents, and there's some that are doing the testing, some that are doing the actual
Mm.
writing the code, and then there's like the manager level that you're interfacing with. So we're getting pushed up the ladder of sort of like the higher and higher level of abstraction and
Yeah.
the verification as AI. Like I've done this before actually, where I create something and then I like with Claude and I give it to Chat GPT and say, hey, can you check this for me with sources? Just to
Yeah.
kind of give like another
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you think about that, like if you had 2 agents, you can obviously get way more done if you have them doing more of the verification. So just to say that I think you're absolutely right that that's for sure what's going to happen. And the dangers of that are very maybe obvious, but maybe some of the more subtle dangers, like there's obviously like just the risk level of
Right.
where things can fail. But beyond that, there's this whole idea of like atrophy in human capabilities. And that's more what I've been focusing on in my I am starting a new project right now that's kind of focused on this layer that I can share more about. But
Yes. Amazing.
it's like the more that we offload to AI, the more at risk that puts our own capabilities. And so yesterday I actually presented about this with around AI and creativity, a new model for conscious AI integration.
Mm.
Because if we're not conscious about how we're actually augmenting ourselves, we will just erode certain capabilities without even
Right.
noticing.
Right.
And whether that's like critical thinking or memory, like studies show that we don't remember as much of what we do with AI. And so it kind of gets into like learning and memory issues. And then there's also just as soon as you let something else do something for a certain amount of time, you lose your skill at doing it. And that goes to everything that we're using it for, right? Even like human communication. So
Yeah.
it's really wild to think about that. And I think as helpful as these tools are, we have to be mindful of how to keep these core human skills
Yeah.
from getting eroded.
Right. Or just accept, like, if we're really pushing for these, like, oh, in human evolution, were we supposed to atrophy? I thought we were gonna, or, like, hopefully we find spaces if we're gonna atrophy in some areas, we could excel in others, but what are those, right? I feel like if this was the you know, movie of Iron Man. In Iron Man, we talk about Iron Man and society. Like Jarvis shows up, but we don't keep talking about Jarvis. Now I feel like we're running a movie about Jarvis, and then the Avengers show up every now and then. Like I think we need to like remember why we're doing this in the first place. Like going back to kind of productivity for productivity's sake. Like why are we doing it, right? And or like if we're going to choose to atrophy in some areas, like for example, I don't remember phone numbers anymore, like maybe when I was little, I used to remember. Am I okay with it? I'm okay with it because I'm probably using my memory for other things now. But like if this means memory loss, are we, gaining skills in a different area? So it's kind of this like balance of and we don't know and the real answer is like we have no idea. But I don't know if we also like understand that, what we're doing and the implications of it and if we're fully okay with that, and I think
Yeah, no.
I even like I'm a mother of a 7-year-old, and I
Mm.
think about these things a lot. But I sometimes when I even talk to other parents, I don't see, maybe for the better, like I don't see that level of like thinking these things. And I'm curious, I would love to hear more about the project, but also understand how do we raise awareness on this critical part of this is not even just like economic shift, workforce shift, right? This is, this is contributing to how we evolve as humans.
Exactly. Yes. Totally agree. And I think part of it is just, not having the space and sort of community to do this type of reflection. So that's why I'm starting this new project called Resonance, where we're bringing people together in person for like 12 to 15 person, 4 hour explorations where we focus on AI and something else. So, for example, like we did AI and relationships last month. This month, we're doing AI and work, and we've done AI and creativity. So, creating space for people within the community. And to go back to your point about interdisciplinary, it's all interdisciplinary. So it's like teachers, artists, business people, technologists, and slowing down over this 4 hours to think about exactly what we're saying. So
I love
what
that.
is it? What are the implications for this? Is this going to create better relationships, or is it like how is AI affecting all these different parts of our human society, and how do we want to approach that? And so we've built this structured approach where we're kind of bringing people to a sense of reflection, exploration, but also agency. Like, what do you want to do about that?
Yeah.
Maybe it's the fact that you want to write to your congresspeople and senators about this, or maybe it's the fact that you want to just make sure that you are doing close reading of hard texts to keep your cognitive thinking from atrophying. Like
Yeah.
everybody has to make their own decision, but there is this way that I'm trying to scale out this model, which is bringing these conversations to communities all over the country. As quickly as AI is moving, I feel like this layer of human reflection and keeping what's human at the center is so, so important. So we're actively like expanding this right now, and I'm really excited. And people seem to be so hungry for that type of space to just think together, explore, and be with other humans in person as well.
Oh my God, I love that so much because we were just talking about like how uninspiring the conferences are becoming because sometimes you're not even allowed to ask questions, and I would rather listen to a
Mm.
podcast, like clearly. And I was recently in a AI and social work working group in a small group. There was like chat and mouse rules, so everybody, shared what they thought, and it felt like a safe space, and we were able to discuss. And it's I am, coming out of that, like I've been saying, I think the new model is very much, smaller, community-led, many gatherings that can be more free in conversation. So I'm a huge fan of already what you're doing. I hope it scales, as fast as virus is not a good analogy, but you get it.
Thank
I
you
hope it
so
becomes
much.
an epidemic as soon as possible. We need a good kind of
I love
epidemic.
that. Yes, a positive
A
epidemic.
positive epidemic. It's so needed, and I think it's the exact remedy for the problems we have, the silos, the lack of debate, lack of conversation, lack of trust also in institutions when you even want to do something meaningful, right? Like we sometimes work with big corporations on projects, and from our younger team members or sometimes from my students, I get this question, oh, but they're like so and so, how do you work with them? And I'm like, well, if you look at them up close, there's people in there equally, if not more frustrated, like yourself, who want to make
Mm,
meaningful change or meaningful progress. And how do we empower one another, right? They're not necessarily this like corporate tag, brand. They're also humans. And I think it goes back to remembering our humanity and acting accordingly. So
mm,
I absolutely love that model. I have maybe this is a personal question, but as an artist, um, I've also obviously we had a conversation around, AI generated music or AI, all of these things. How does I think like I feel like artists are one of the society members who really have kind of or seemingly found their sense of purpose, and not that in the end our main purpose is to be human on this planet, but as an artist you're also you know, creating something out of that that could give back to also to humanity. And in such a, and the artists I know also like very so much purpose, so much creativity. How do you feel? And I know you're already looking at technology and a good use of it in these spaces as well. But we talked about like human evolution or atrophies or abilities when it comes to purpose. As an artist, as a human, how does everything happening with AI make you feel?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And I've been thinking so deeply about this because when the first AI music generation tool that's kind of the most popular now, Suno,
Mm,
came out, I played with it. And basically, for those that don't know, you put in a prompt and it generates a song in like 2 seconds or 30 seconds, whatever. And when I first did that, I just had an existential crisis because I was like, oh my God, this is brings up so many emotions because it's not just that it's like, so I've been going around and doing these talks, playing AI generated music and asking people to guess at the beginning. Because
mm,
a lot of people say, oh, well, it's not as good as human made music. But the truth is, like 97% of people, according to a new study, can't tell the difference.
wow.
So there's so many implications for that of like, okay, the data that it's trained on, and what does that mean?
Okay.
And the sense of meaning, like you said, of purpose. Like if you can generate a fully fleshed out output, what's the point? Why would I spend 30 to 40 hours on creating a song? And the truth is, after my existential crisis, it helped me really have to define why I'm creating. Because that 30 to 40 hours, like skipping through that is kind of skipping through the transformational process of creating. And
Right.
I think creativity is not about the outputs only. I mean, it is in some ways, right? It's always the final piece is what people look at and consume. But the artist itself might go through, I mean, sometimes harrowing experiences to
Yeah.
get to that finished product, painful, messy, questioning, self doubt, failures, whatever they went through, or maybe it's just in a flash of inspiration. But that process is part of, I think, what the point of this all is. And so, to your question, it's like, yes, we have to be so mindful of what we're skipping over by bringing AI into the process. So, I've been creating new types of tools with AI. I'm really not a fan of these music generation tools.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of anger in the art world about them. I'm not like against them. I think it's could be really powerful and meaningful for some people to use that. But for myself, I've built this tool called a song lab where I have it trained on Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan and Radiohead and Florence and the Machine. And
Oh
it
my God.
basically,
You picked the flavors, basically.
yes. And it's like it can give me ideas based on, okay, Bob Dylan would have done this chord, or like, check out the way Florence and the Machine does. It's like my personal kind of as if I was in the studio with one of them, what would
Right.
they
Oh,
offer?
wow.
And it's like a creative partner.
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, it's like taking back the empowering approach with AI and not using it to replace what I'm doing or even write for me. Because again, for me, that's going to atrophy my, not just my gifts and my talents that I've worked so hard over many years to create, but also the meaning behind it and the kind of way that that messy creative process changes me and shapes me into hopefully a better artist in the end.
Yeah, you created your Jarvis.
Exactly.
See, everyone, this is the model we need. That's enough. That's the end of the podcast. But seriously, though, what you described is actually, our last part, we go into kind of what would be your one piece of advice. But I think that really beautifully ties to that, like what you said around be mindful of what you're skipping. I think that's kind of the advice to humanity today altogether. Even if you're gonna do it, ask what you didn't do at that points so that you can be mindful, because I think with any other space in the, or like problem space we see, when there is more awareness, there is more action, there is sometimes opting out, there is, it translates into some action over time. And if it doesn't, it translates into anxiety anyway, because and then you won't go into these like existential crises. But that's such a beautiful advice and such a beautiful way also you kind of acted on it, from a still welcoming place, not pushing against it fully, but adapting how it should be, show up meaningfully. And it's so beautiful because like I feel like in the end, and probably what's giving us kind of this like, it's not sitting us well with us, like seeing all this like replacement. As humans, we came to this world to create, to produce, to do something. And so, let's just do that in collaboration with your jars, basically. um, so that was
Exactly.
such a beautiful example. Also, the analogy, another one like going in my brain as you were describing of the skipping, like, I'm Turkish American. I love, Turkish tea. I love a good espresso after a dinner, but like, I don't want to skip the dinner. I don't want to skip the dinner and just have the tea or the espresso. That's like the final, good touch. Like, I think the hope is that like maybe it will make us less output, like less artifact focus, but it will help us reshift our focus into the process and what we gain out of that and the meaning of that. So hopefully that's the reframe we learn through the education infusions and the mindset shifts, the reframings we have in these like smaller discussions, and I guess community activations.
Yes,
So
exactly.
thank you so much for this conversation, for all the work that you do. Anything else you would like to add that we should follow in the upcoming months that might be coming up? Or is there a way we can follow the events that you run with residents?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you just go to resonancesalon.com, you can go there or follow my Substack where I write kind of along these lines. But I'll definitely be sharing more as we bring these conversations to new communities. Also have a few songs about this coming up, so excited to share those as well. And just thank you so much. This is such a great conversation. I appreciated all that you shared as well and the questions. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. And subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. And don't forget to join us next week. See you.